The blockbuster that sent Micah Parsons to the Green Bay Packers didn't just reshape one franchise's pass rush, it jolted the rest of the league into remembering an uncomfortable truth about the NFL's marketplace. If a 26-year-old, era-tilting defender who has led the league in total pressures since entering in 2021 can be moved, then almost any player can be discussed at the right price. The trade, confirmed late last week and followed by Parsons' introductory comments in Wisconsin, punctured the notion that certain stars are ideologically untradeable and reopened the door for aggressive front offices to at least pick up the phone. The reverberations of that deal are now rattling through team buildings where Super Bowl windows are measured in off-seasons rather than eras. San Francisco is one such building. After years of pushing financial chips to the center of the table in pursuit of a Lombardi, the 49ers spent much of the 2025 executing what amounted to a soft reset, a recalibration that included parting with multiple core players and absorbing a heavy dose of dead money while preserving room for selective strikes. Independent assessments throughout the summer pegged the 49ers as a team with significant 2025 cap flexibility relative to peers, even after major departures, with public estimates placing available space in the dozens of millions depending on accounting date and methodology. That context is why, in the wake of the Parsons precedent, the league's most obvious question around San Francisco isn't whether general manager John Lynch and head coach Kyle Shanahan will place any calls, but who they might call about. The club has been linked all off-season to the wide receiver market, a natural consequence of both its roster churn and the organization's offensive identity under Shanahan. Following the exits of high-profile contributors, names that have included, depending on the reporting, wideout Deebo Samuel, linebacker Dre Greenlaw, defensive tackle Javon Hargrave, and safety Talanoa Hufanga, among others. The conversation has inevitably pivoted to how the 49ers will manufacture explosive plays and spacing advantages against defenses that have spent years studying their tendencies. One name looms over any swing big exploration: Miami's Tyreek Hill. The connective tissue is obvious. Dolphins head coach Mike McDaniel is a Shanahan disciple, whose branches and roots are embedded in San Francisco's scheme. The two staffs speak a similar football language, even as their play-calling personalities diverge. More importantly, Hill is one of the handful of non-quarterbacks who can meaningfully change a team's Super Bowl odds on arrival. That is precisely why he has not already been dealt, despite months of chatter that periodically flared across the calendar. Chatter that the Dolphins publicly downplayed in January when general manager Chris Grier said Hill had not asked for a trade even as emotions ran hot at the end of a disappointing season. If San Francisco is tempted to test Miami's resolve, the financial and logistical calculus is both the roadblock and the roadmap. Hill's 2025 compensation is complex, but well documented. A $10 million base salary, alongside a $15.85 million option bonus, and other guarantees that rendered this league year particularly expensive for Miami, and particularly delicate in trade talks. The option bonus mechanism, structured to be due around the turn from August into the regular season, was a flashpoint for every cap analyst looking at trade feasibility, because timing determines which side carries the proration and cash responsibility. In short, the money is real, the guarantees are significant, and the date-based triggers matter. Layered atop the contract math is the human element that has fueled months of speculation. Reporting at various points since January portrayed friction, some of it visible on game days, some of it felt inside the building, and then walked back in subsequent press availabilities. Miami officials publicly rejected the idea that Hill demanded out, but the episode added context to why league observers keep the Dolphins on every monitor this list. Even in the present tense, small signals get scrutinized. For example, roster status notes like Hill not appearing among Miami's captains drew attention amid a broader effort by the organization to move forward cleanly. None of that guarantees a trade. It does, however, explain why rival general managers would at least place a call rather than assume a no. For the 49ers, the theoretical football fit needs no elaborate defense. Shanahan's offense has long been a geometry engine. Create horizontal and vertical stress simultaneously, force defenses to declare leverage prematurely, then punish the angle they choose. Hill is a stress multiplier. His vertical speed changes safety depths, and his short area explosiveness flips open windows against leverage that would be perfectly played versus almost anyone else. In San Francisco's toolbox, heavy motion, condensed splits, hard play action, backfield eye candy, Hill would present the kind of alignment problem that sometimes shows up as a 3-yard glance route, with 22 yards of yards after catch, and sometimes shows up as a safety who opens his hips one tick early, creating a throw window one tick late at a different level. That flexibility is part of his appeal and part of why Miami has needed him to be their spacing engine since 2022. The counter-arguments are real. San Francisco's reshaping this spring and summer wasn't accidental. It was a function of both cap discipline and philosophical choice after years of all-in pushes. Expending premium picks and absorbing a large veteran contract would narrow future paths and intensify present-day expectations, and the other side of the table gets a vote. McDaniel is trying to navigate his own roster's pressures. A quarterback on a massive extension, an offensive line in need of constant attention, and a defense whose identity shifted in 2024 and 2025. Trading away his most dynamic weapon requires not just a haul of assets, but a coherent plan for how Miami replaces Hill's gravity. That's why, despite persistent rumor cycles and plenty of armchair cap sheets, the status quo has held. Yet predictive columns and cap site analyses have kept surfacing the same structural reality. The 2025 structure is expensive and complicated, which is why creative teams keep sketching packages and why "never say never" remains the operative phrase around the league. From a purely transactional standpoint, San Francisco could assemble multiple shapes of offer depending on whether Miami prioritized cap relief, picks, or a player-plus-picks combination, including a receiver on an expiring-type trajectory who would be eligible for a payday, such as a physical inside-outside target, could ease Miami's near-term depth concerns while the draft compensation addresses the longer horizon. Pure draft pick packages would, of course, be expensive. Recent history for star wideouts suggests that the opening bid for elites starts at a first-rounder plus additional premium capital, with the final price dictated by timing, suitors, and the incumbent club's negotiating leverage. Cap space. Engineering on San Francisco's side would be required, but the 49ers' posture entering the season was not that of a team boxed into inaction. Multiple independent breakdowns this summer framed the club as having one of the larger cap cushions in the league, after restructures and exits, providing room to absorb an elite player's year-one hit if the front office chose to rebalance. Cash flows. The Parsons trade only strengthens the case that asking is not only free, it's mandatory for teams that believe they are one or two pieces short. Parsons himself acknowledged the surreal nature of the move, while coverage around the league captured how fast long-running stalemates can flip once a deadline and a motivated buyer arrive. If Dallas could decide that multiple premium assets today were better than an indefinite high-stakes negotiation tomorrow, and Green Bay could decide that paying top-of-market dollars for a defender who tilts protections on every snap was worth the outlay, then an imaginative front office can justify almost any conversation provided the math works. That is precisely the lesson general managers will carry into calls after Labor Day. For Shanahan and Lynch, The competitive logic is familiar. Every contending roster eventually hits the point where replacing internal departures with internal development becomes less about idealism and more about necessity. San Francisco has made clear, both by action and by omission, that 2025 would lean on growth from within after saying goodbye to fan-favorite names. Local and national outlets have spent much of July and August cataloging those exits and debating which of them will sting most. Safety. Talanoa Hufanga's absence, for example, has been singled out repeatedly as a pressure point, given the defense's stylistic demands and the injuries that complicate early season plans behind him. That doesn't preclude a splash. It, too, just explains why any splash would be aimed precisely at the kinds of edges that win playoff games. Third down conversions, explosives, and field-tilting matchups. The Hill file offers a final layer of nuance that front offices must weigh. Optics. After a turbulent winter news cycle that included emotionally charged social media posts, clarifying comments from team leadership, and outside speculation about disciplinary lines, the Dolphins have spent months steering back toward normalcy. Even this week's smaller headlines, leadership group announcements, and depth chart housekeeping get parsed for hidden meaning because that's the reality. For star-centric teams in a 24/7 ecosystem, if a suitor like San Francisco were to engage, part of the pitch would be not just football and compensation, but also a clean narrative reset for all involved. The kind of "we're moving forward" storyline that coaches and players prefer. Once the games begin. Whether that narrative reset is even desired in Miami is the open question. The Dolphins have as much reason as anyone to believe that a calmer 2025 locker room paired with Hill's production is a better path than any trade. What happens next will depend on timing as much as appetite. The option bonus trigger for Hill complicated the summer mechanics and likely hardened positions around a pre-week 1D. One blockbuster. Once the season kicks off, weekly risk, injuries, performance swings, unforeseen cap moves elsewhere either chills the market or creates urgency. The 49ers' schedule and the NFC landscape will also inform calculus. If San Francisco's offense hums from the jump and young pass catchers seize larger roles, the case for patience strengthens. If the unit looks a play short against elite opponents, the case for a star-level injection intensifies. The only universal is the one the Parsons deal reinforced. You don't know where the line really is until you make someone say it out loud. There is a practical layer to remember about cap accounting, too. Public-facing trackers and independent analyses are invaluable, but snapshots often diverge because they model different assumptions about top 51 rules, pending incentives, and the speed at which restructures get reflected. Over the course of June through August, coverage of San Francisco's cap outlook depicted a club with real room to maneuver, a point reflected both in macro overviews and in reporting on individual restructures that opened additional space. That variability in the reported figures doesn't undermine the core takeaway for a trade exploration. In fact, it underscores why teams like the 49ers, who plan calendar moves months in advance, keep multiple if-then cap models live, so that when an acquiring opportunity appears, the financial runway is already mapped, all of which brings this back to first principles. The 49ers built their modern identity on trench dominance, a run game that forces daily recalibration, and a passing game that punishes defensive rules with precision rather than volume. At their best, they don't need a singular star at receiver to function. The system manufactures open grass and yards after catch. But the league evolves, and playoffs are won at the thin edge of margins, where one coverage bust or one safety held a half step too long changes the bracket. Hill is the rare non-quarterback who alters those margins before the ball is snapped. That doesn't obligate San Francisco to bid. it does obligate them to measure, especially now that another sacred cow just crossed state lines in a deal that looked impossible until it was suddenly done. If the 49ers dial Miami, they'll do so armed with more than curiosity. They will have modeled how Hill's cash flows can be massaged across the remainder of 2025 and into 2026. They will have plotted how pick deficits in 2026 or 2027 can be mitigated through compensatory formulas and lower-cost rookie contributors at other positions. They will have weighed the risk of tying a chunk of cap to a receiver in his early 30s against the reward of fielding the most explosive offense in the conference. And they will have sketched contingency paths if no is the answer. Paths that include more modest acquisitions, internal target consolidation, and a recommitment to the heavier personnel groupings that have been their blunt force instrument when finesse isn't the Knights' language. The Dolphins, for their part, will have an equally detailed binder outlining why the best use of Hill is as a Miami Dolphin, how to keep his on-field value aligned with locker room leadership, and what it would actually take for the math and meaning to say yes. The rest of the league will be watching, not because a Hill to San Francisco scenario is likely, but because Parsons proved once again that nothing is truly off the table in modern roster construction. Green Bay didn't just acquire a pass rush terror. It provided a case study in how conviction plus creativity can upend months of stalemate in a matter of hours. San Francisco's front office is too experienced to chase a headline for its own sake, but it is equally unlikely to preemptively close doors that the current market has left ajar. In a league calibrated to punish hesitation, the lesson of the week is simple enough. You make the call, you listen, and you see where the possibilities actually are. And after the seismic move that sent a perennial Defensive Player of the Year candidate north, the possibilities feel broader than they did just days ago.